After 2 months after I actually finished sewing, I'm finally getting around to sharing with you the making of my Relaxed Regency project. If you're new here and you have no idea what I'm on about, hello, thank you for joining us here on Retro Claude. I'm pretty sure I mention it in almost every video, but I'm disabled, and as a result my approach to sewing and costuming is a little bit different than a lot of the people we see here on YouTube or over on Instagram. Firstly, until I started on this Relaxed Regency project, I had never actually made myself a costume. I like to sew vintage clothes, but I haven't sewn anything earlier than the 1930s for myself. This is largely because I really didn't feel it was possible for me to wear historical clothing, due to the foundation garments just being so uncomfortable and cumbersome. But at the end of last year, I went through a really rough patch with my health and I had to put all other projects on hold while I was on very strict bed rest. I really missed sewing, however, and so I asked some of my fellow costumers for some ideas for an easy hand sewing project I could do from bed, and they suggested a Regency dress. Now, when I make historical clothes for others, I usually draft or drape a pattern from scratch, but that wasn't an option from bed, so I had to use a commercial paper pattern, and many people recommended Laughing Moon 138. And our little sew-along was born. It's been so lovely to have all these people sewing along with this project, and I will put a link to the Relaxed Regency playlist in the cards. We're almost at 40 videos now, which is so exciting. I never believed so many people would join in with this sew-along. It's been so great to watch everybody's Regency outfits coming together. I've already made a video about the undergarments, which I will also link to. These were all made when I was in bed, but at the beginning of the new year, my health started to pick up, and I wanted to throw myself into this project a bit more, in the hopes I could enter the Foundations Revealed competition. As a result, this went from being a relaxed Regency project to a stressed Regency project. I occasionally do this to myself. Whenever I have to take time off and prioritize my health, I end up feeling really guilty and then overwork myself because I feel I have to catch up or to prove to myself that I'm better or whatever. The psychology of being disabled is tough, man. But anyway, I threw together this project in about a month and I made the deadline for the competition. I did film a lot of the process, but as I've been working my way through editing these videos, oh man, it's so chaotic, and I can't really make sense of a lot of it, so I've done my best to edit together some videos that will at least give you an idea of how these garments were made. But there will be sections where I just have to talk you through what I did. I've tried to divide the footage up by garment, so this video is about the chemisette, which is the white frilly collar attached to almost like a little undershirt or partlet. So for the pattern, I turned to Janet Arnold's Patterns of Fashion 1. There's a whole page of chemisettes, and I chose the one that was closest to the time period I was working in. Oh, I should say the Foundations Revealed competition has a theme, and this year the theme was Once Upon a Time, so you had to make a costume for a character from a book. As I was already making a Regency dress, I decided to sort of adapt the costume to fit the theme, and so this became a costume for Little Dorrit by Charles Dickens. Little Dorrit is set in the late 1820s, so that was the era we're going for here. I scaled up the pattern and checked it was going to fit me, labelling it carefully so I knew what it was. I am very suspicious of Janet Arnold patterns generally. I know people rave about them, but they are really hit and miss. Janet Arnold was a historian, not a pattern cutter, and there are times when it shows, so I only ever use her patterns as a guide for shapes and seam placement. We also had a big discussion among costumers about the fabric names for different weights of cotton. Now, they vary from country to country, but this is what I consider a muslin, or at least as close to a muslin as we can get in the modern era. Janet Arnold described the original chemisette as being made of cambric, which, unless cambric meant something different in the 70s, it is quite clear to see from the photograph of this chemisette on the National Trust online collection, it is not. Cambric is not sheer and is also known as chambray, and so I used my eyes and academic discretion and went with muslin. All the edges of the chemisette body were finished with the tiniest rolled hem I could manage. In a way, I wish I had made it just a touch bigger, because this doesn't feel very secure from fraying. The shoulder seams were joined with a mantua maker's seam. If you don't know what this is, I recommend watching the video that Burnley and Trowbridge has on this technique, At this point, I was still hand sewing everything, mostly because this muslin was very delicate and the machine stitching would have been too imposing and distorting. I drew threads to cut the muslin as straight as I could for the gathered frill that goes around the edge of the collar. The frill was longer than the width of the fabric, so I had to seam some pieces together, again by hand. I measured out the width of the frill as described in Patterns of Fashion and cut the frill edge with pinking shears. The original was described as having the edge buttonhole stitched over. I did a sample of this and it looked awful and just pulled out the threads of the muslin, so I opted for a modern solution. Fray check. I knew that I wanted the colour of the chemisette to be hand embroidered because I'm not brilliant at embroidery and I wanted to get better. I also wanted this to be an opportunity to incorporate some Little Dorrit-ness into this costume. So I played around and I came up with a design that is based on some original Regency embroidery patterns, but is adapted to represent some of the themes of Little Dorrit. In case you're not familiar with the plot of Little Dorrit, Amy, or Little Dorrit, is born in debtor's prison. Her father was a gentleman who fell in hard times and ended up in debtor's prison. The family's fortunes then change for the better, and Amy struggles to adjust to this newfound life of wealth. So I chose symbols of wealth and imprisonment for the embroidery. These scrolls are actually pound signs, we've got some Victorian style handcuffs, and these are locks, and then the scallops around the edge are to represent the ups and downs of the Dorrit family's fortunes. These I chose to work in chain stitch. I find chain stitch to be one of the simplest embroidery stitches and it looks very effective. Indian styles of embroidery like Ari and Tambour were very popular in the Regency era because of colonialism. So you see lots of examples of it both in its traditional form and in imitation. The pound signs were worked in backstitch and the other elements in satin stitch. The chains of the handcuffs were made using French knots. I used whip gathers to both finish the edge of the frill and gather it down. Again, Burnley and Trowbridge have a video on this if you want to see it in more detail. I realised that I needed to consider how much I needed to gather it up to fit around the collar. So I did some measuring and marked on the midpoints on both the collar and the frill. That way I could make sure to gather the frill down to the right amount as I was sewing. I then whipped the edge of my whip-gathered frill onto the roll-hemmed edge of my collar. It was then time to attach the collar to the body of the chemisette. I wasn't entirely sure how to do this and I was short on seam allowance and things were starting to fray pretty badly. In the end, I decided on a mantua maker's seam, like for the shoulders. I pinned the collar on in readiness, but I had this weird extension past the edge of the collar. This is what I mean about Janet Arnold patterns. No information was given about where the edge of the collar should come to and the illustration wasn't very helpful. Thankfully, for this particular pattern, I could look at the photo of the original object. It turns out not all the edges had a rolled hem. There was actually quite a substantial turn back on the centre front edge, and the edge of the frill looked like it was sewn to the neckline too. Unfortunately, it was too late for me to do this as I had already stitched the frill on back from the very edge of the collar. It ended up turning back like a little revere, which is kind of cute, but not how it was supposed to look. And you might be able to see in this clip that I actually stitched the collar onto the body of the chemisette wrong, so the seam allowances and hems of the body are on the outside. This is really annoying, but I can't fix it because the fabric is too delicate. I would ruin the collar completely if I took it off, so I'm going to have to live with it. But all in all, it turned out just how I wanted it. It's subtle, has that neoclassical feel, but on closer inspection you start to see the symbolism of Little Dorrit. We all make stupid mistakes at times, and that's okay. This was such a simple little project. It's only the embroidery that took forever. I certainly will not be retraining as an embroiderer anytime soon. It does not bring me the same kind of joy that garment making does. Indeed, hand sewing in general is not my cup of tea. I mentioned this in my undergarments video, but I am perfectly happy to use a sewing machine for construction seams. I am sure our ancestors would be like, yo, what are you doing? What a privilege to have so much free time that you choose not to use this incredible labor-saving device you have at your disposal. And you know, I as a disabled person have to be mindful of how I spend my mental and physical energy, and hand sewing is just not something I want to do with my time. That being said, I am glad I took the time to do it on this project. It's always good to keep trying new skills so that you stay sharp. There are some other projects I want to do that involve embroidery, and so I feel a lot more confident about doing them now that I've done this chemisette. So that's all for now. There will be more videos coming about the rest of this project, both how I made the Laughing Moon 138 pattern and also how I made my straw bonnet, which I hope will be useful for you. So really, all that's left to say is, thanks very much for watching. See you next time. I blow dried my hair this morning because it's getting so long, and the resulting look is kind of like that bitch in a 90s teen movie that I secretly always hoped I would grow up to become. Oh, wait, hang on. Much better. I really hope you appreciate that joke because I had to go all the way up the stairs to get this thing.